This episode of the ZuLoo Poodcast is sponsored by ZuLoo Inc., a benefit corporation dedicated to the goal of universal access to toilets, hygiene, clean water and sanitation through the power of social enterprise. Learn more at ZuLoo.com.
We are really excited to dive into sewage. I mean, this is our jam. This is what we get excited about.
Well, I hope that you're not going to actually dive into sewage because that would probably end up
yes.
not so
Metaphorically
pleasantly
speaking.
Yeah, wonderful.
Jasmine,
Welcome to the ZuLoo Poodcast, where we talk all things poop, toilets, and sanitation. Through insightful news, impact stories, and quirky humour, we aim to discuss and highlight the critical role toilets play in whisking poop out of our lives, the impact toilets have, or lack thereof, in the health and wellness of humanity, and what ZuLoo is doing to help solve the current global sanitation crisis.
Hey everybody, we're so glad you're here with us for another episode of the ZuLoo Poodcast. I am your co-host, Jocelyn Gardner, joined by Darren Mangum in, I was going to say Kelly Green, but I don't think it's a Kelly Green. It's a striking green.
It is a striking green.
It's like a moss spring green.
I was going for striking.
Okay,
so
it's striking.
I think you hit it.
You nailed
first
it.
off, right? So, yeah, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm really good. Summer's like zooming by. I don't know when this will be out into the world, but at this very moment, we're at the tail end of summer and it's just gone by way too fast.
I know. Is it hot up where you live up there?
It's hot everywhere. Yes,
but you
it's
live
hot and
you
it's
live
smoky.
in the mountains, though,
I know,
so
and it is a little
still,
bit cooler than it is down in the valleys,
Yeah.
but still, I can be
summer.
outside for about 5 minutes and then I'm tapping out.
Yeah, Utah
'Cause I don't
summer,
like
it's going to be hot. Right?
It's really hot. You can't escape it.
I've got a client in New York. He was like calling me yesterday. Hey, I'm going to come out and visit you. I'm like, maybe you should come in the fall.
Yeah, it's true.
That's when
because we're complaining about heat, but they're really getting it this year.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So.
And so I'm like, don't come and plan on cooling off because it's pretty toasty out there.
You're right. You were wise to advise him. Come in the fall.
Come in the fall when you got the colors and you got the, Utah's great in the fall. I mean, it's great year round, but
that's true. Yeah, there's really no bad time to come.
Yeah.
Someplace I've never been that I've always wanted to go is New Orleans. I don't know how hot it is there right now, but that is the location of today's interview guest, Jasmine Fournier, the executive director of the Ocean Sewage Alliance.
Yeah, well, it's hot year round. No question.
I think it's always sticky down there, which is great for the skin. That's
right. Yeah. Great for your skin for sure.
You grew up in Texas.
Well, I live in Puerto Rico
skin?
right now,
and
it's just great. You feel like when you breathe, it's like, it's like
standing in front of a humidifier.
Yes, it's the best air to breathe. But New Orleans, I don't know. I mean, I've just visited. I had my parents grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, like right there, and so we would always go back and visit Mississippi when somebody would die. We would go back to Mississippi and we drive through New Orleans.
Yeah.
And sometimes we would stop and see. I mean, just beautiful city, and obviously it's got, like every city, it's got its quirks and issues, right?
Yeah.
Which I think Jasmine talked about.
Yes. And we will get into all of that. It was really interesting to chat with her, specifically about some of the challenges that they face down there. All right, let's jump into our interview with Jasmine. All right, Jasmine, thank you so much for joining us today on the Poodcast. We are really excited to dive into sewage. I mean, this is our jam. This is what we get excited about.
Well, I hope that you're not going to actually dive into sewage because that would probably end up not so
metaphorically
pleasantly
speaking.
Yeah, wonderful.
Jasmine, Executive Director of the Ocean Sewage Alliance. I spent a lot of time on your website this morning, understanding more about what you guys do and then a little bit about your background, which is, you have a diverse background, but it does kind of make sense, microbiology, immunology, epidemiology, all of the ologies.
All the ologies, yeah.
But I would love to hear from you, a little bit about you and how you got involved in sewage, of all things.
Of all things. Well, I think that every day we're all a little bit involved in sewage because we all use the toilet. So I think I was connected there to start just because I'm a human with regular bodily functions. But I started out in public health. And I live in New Orleans. As you know, I have to have an alligator behind me to prove it. And as I was working in public health, I decided that what I cared most about was the environment. And I started then working in environmental health. I started working with on-site wastewater, which is, like each person at their home has kind of like a tiny little municipal sewage plant, but each person maintains it. So that's how I started into my sewage endeavors. And I was trying to convince people that they should maintain their systems. And as you know, trying to convince people to do stuff doesn't always work. And I was in academia and I felt like I was ready for a change. And I found this job, and it's like landing a dream job. So I love the ocean. I have spent a good part of my life spending time around water. And I think for me, it's a pretty easy sell to say that we want to keep sewage out of the ocean. Most people are on board with that messaging. So I came on to Ocean Sewage Alliance about a year ago. And what we've been doing is figuring out how can we actually work towards our mission, because it's pretty broad. And as you may or may not know, sewage tends to be on everyone's mind when there's an emergency. Say there's a sewage spill, there's a pipe, something's going on in your house and it smells really bad. That is when people are like, we need to do something about this. But outside of emergencies, there's not a lot of attention to sewage issues. And I would say for the most part, most folks probably outside of this little Zoom room don't know that sewage pollution is an issue. And there's some
you live in New Orleans, so you basically not only live near the ocean, but you're kind of below the ocean, right? You're below the ocean, and obviously, everybody, I'm sure, were you there during Hurricane Katrina when they had the flooding there?
I was not yet here for Katrina. I moved here in 2008, but I do have a couple hurricanes under my belt for my local street. But no, in New Orleans also, if you think about us on the map, we're at the bottom of a very long river. So what I found really interesting that I've moved into this work, most of my friends don't know where we get our drinking water from. And we get our drinking water from the river. And you might imagine there's cities above us and they're discharging their treated sewage into the river. So we are sort of de facto having treated sewage coming into our drinking water system because we're down here at the bottom of the Mississippi River. So I think it's just, it's interesting that when I pull people, because I'm so fun at a bar asking people, do you know where your drinking water is coming from? I think that it's just not a lot of people know that.
Yeah, I think, for most of us, we flush and forget. We do not think about what happens next, like the intricate system that is at play. And, if we're fortunate enough to live in a place with like a really effective water treatment facility, how that works, where the water goes afterwards. And, that's something that we talk about a lot here, but I think it's always worth reminding our listeners, how does it actually work? I'm assuming that in New Orleans, you guys face very specific challenges because you are below the sea level. I'm up here in the mountains. We have our own challenges. Darren splits his time between here and Puerto Rico. So every geographical location faces something a little bit different with how they have to treat their waste. But, just give us a general overview, because I would have never thought, well, okay, we're not putting raw sewage into the ocean. We're putting treated sewage into all of our, into lakes, rivers, whatever. So where does the problem lie?
Sure. Well, it also depends on where you are. So for the most part, we're hoping that we're putting treated sewage into the ocean. But I've looked over some of your podcasts. You certainly have a wide breadth of people you've interviewed. Some people are discharging untreated sewage into various different bodies of water or like ditches and such, just because that infrastructure doesn't exist. But for like, let's say us in the US, for the most part, everyone is there. You go to the bathroom, you flush the toilet, and you, like you said, forget about it. But there is then a travel system. It goes through pipes to a municipal wastewater facility. They treat it. to a certain standard and then discharge this treated sewage into whatever body of water. But like from that, you have still stuff that doesn't get taken out, like nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen. Also, pharmaceuticals can still be in treated wastewater, microplastics.
Wait, what do you mean pharmaceuticals? Like things that people have ingested?
Sure. So when we're taking medication, it's not always, this is going to sound real nerdy. So I'm going to go full nerd on you for a second. So we metabolize pharmaceuticals to a certain extent, but they're not always 100% metabolized when we pee them out. So you might have metabolites, which is a different version of the medication, or you might still have medication that is being peed out. I think you might have heard about frogs or fish that change genders because of birth control in their ecosystem. So it's some of that stuff isn't always treated out in the way we treat our sewage and wastewater. The one thing we talk about a lot at Ocean Sewage Alliance is, can we raise the bar for how we're treating our sewage and wastewater? Can we make sure that when we're discharging, the water is as clean as, like, say, it would be if we're getting it out of, like, say, our faucet? Because I'm really, really confident in our drinking water system here, and that I'm not drinking pharmaceuticals in our drinking water. But because we're discharging sewage, the treatment isn't as high. But you have some places, like, say, in California, in Orange County, because they have limited access to water, which makes sense given where they are. They might have a reuse system where their treated sewage goes into their drinking water facility. And actually, what we've seen is that cities that use treated sewage and waste as drinking water, their water that they're taking in is cleaner than other municipalities, like, say, New Orleans, where we're getting our water from the river. Those, like, kind of one systems, their drinking water is actually like a higher quality because they're having the treated sewage going directly into their drinking water facility. And they have a lot of precautions around that. So, like, Orange County is a great example of, I just went on a rant, but there is a bunch of other stuff that's in our sewage that isn't treated with the secondary treatment. And you might have heard, like, about microplastics, PFAS, that stuff too still might be in treated sewage and wastewater.
Well, it gets into the food supply, right? Like, you know, your fish and your shrimp and all the critters in the sea that uptake, you know, pharmaceuticals. That's what I've heard. I mean, I eat a lot of fish, and that's what I've heard is, like, hey, they're finding pharmaceuticals in the fish. Is that?
Yeah, because, like I said, it depends on the level of treatment. And I saw an article, I can't quote it, but I would just say, to point to it, there's some, like, animals, like, this is maybe it's called, like, the cocaine shark. So people might flush drugs down the toilet, and then it goes into the ecosystem. So you can find them in those marine animals as well. So it's not like we're purifying the water from the sewage treatment plants to a standard that we would hope that would protect marine ecosystems like fish and corals and seagrass beds. So, so that's a long-winded answer to that.
But that is something, I mean, we've been doing this podcast for a while. The pharmaceutical angle is one I've never heard. I would have never thought of on my own. You know, not that we are, like, trying to sound alarms about it, but it just goes to show there are so many things going into our water that, you know, and we're not talking about treated drinking water. We're talking about, you know, treated sewage going into the ocean or rivers or wherever. There's so many things in there that we just aren't even considering. And then, you know, you can say, well, I'm swimming in it, I'm not eating it. Yeah, but the fish are. It is still going to come back to us in one way or the other. So that's just some light bulbs went off in my head.
Also, we had a guest on not too long ago that talked about there's a difference between, what was it, the legal, like, EPA legal standard, and what was the other standard? It was,
you know, what's acceptable for health and what's acceptable legally to have in the water
sometimes
is
a big
not the
difference.
same thing. So you guys, if I'm correct, and please forgive or correct me if I'm not, you guys just completed a big report. Tell us about the findings in this report and what was the premise for it. Yeah.
Well, we're a somewhat new nonprofit, and what we've been trying to do is let people know that sewage pollution is a problem. So we've done a couple of campaigns talking about sewage pollution. We started in 2021, so we're not brand new, but we're not, 30 years old. And we know that it isn't enough to just say the sewage pollution is a problem and that we need to, protect our marine ecosystems because they have value to us. To convince, policymakers, banks who do investment, municipalities who might not think investing in municipal infrastructure for sewage and wastewater is a priority, how can we convince them that it is? And I think oftentimes we look at economic studies to show, okay, here is the cost of not doing this. So that's kind of how we got to this study. And we worked with a group called Economist Impact, which is like a nonprofit-y part of the magazine Economist that maybe you've seen at the airport, or if you're a real nerd, subscribe to read about economic stuff. I was an economics major in college, and then I still can't say it properly. Boggles the mind. So we teamed up with them because that's not really my background. My background is public health. So they did the numbers part of the study, and we advised on, what we thought was important. And the study, when they ran the numbers, they created a model to show, how is there an economic loss if you're not properly treating sewage, or, like one of our countries was the United Kingdom. They mostly have good sewage, but you might have seen in some news sources that they have had a privatization of some of their sewage and wastewater infrastructure, which has led to sewage spills. So while they're a very developed country, everybody has still got their problems. Even here in the U.S. and places like San Francisco, in New York City, they have systems called combined sewer overflows. So it's like basically your rain water goes into a system that then connects to the sewage plant. So when it rains a lot, it might overwhelm the system and discharge untreated sewage. So that actually happens in New York City and San Francisco. So all this to say, each country has very different issues with sewage. So we had 5 countries that we included in our initial study. We had Kenya, and I hope that you're speaking to one of my colleagues who's really wonderful, Elizabeth, who's in Kenya. We had the UK, Philippines, India, and Brazil. So we picked those countries because we had a good sense of the data that already existed around sewage and wastewater. And we had a team of experts that knew a lot about those specific countries. So what we found out, and I'm not going to get too much into the numbers, but sewage causes economic losses through fisheries and agriculture and to human health. And so, I think that we all know that, but now we have a number to show here's the actual economic loss from this. And say if you look at a country like India as compared to a country like the UK, they have different issues with sewage and wastewater. So you might have a country like India has more of the population that has no sewage treatment at all, as compared to, say, a more developed country like the UK that has, for the most part, treated sewage and wastewater, but again, still has issues like sewage spills and like the systems that don't quite work for the population. And what I was really proud of with this study is, for the first time that I've seen, we can look at the cost to the ocean for not treating sewage and wastewater. And so for us, now we have, a tool to say, you do need to invest in this infrastructure. That's compared to some of the sexy stuff like roads, military police, things that tend to get more municipal funding. You can show if you don't invest in this, it's costing you dollars in your GDP. So that's how we got to we're just trying to find out how to convince folks who are decision makers to put money into sewage and wastewater. So we decided to speak their language for this one report.
Well, it sounds like it was a bit, you tackled a big subject. Mm-hmm. Were there any findings that surprised you or maybe just weren't what you expected?
Well, one thing that I was surprised about in the study was how we were able to look at dead zones in the ocean. So I'm in Louisiana. We have a pretty large dead zone here in the Gulf of Mexico. And we were able to see, okay, what's the cost of these dead zones on...
Wait, what's a dead zone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so a dead zone, a dead zone is an area in a body of water, and I'm going to talk about the Gulf of Mexico because it's my down the street neighbor, where you might have nutrients from wastewater or sewage like nitrogen and phosphorus, and what it causes is an algae bloom. So I think we've all certainly been to a beach after there's been an algae bloom, and it causes, dead fish to wash up on the shore. So it's an area of the water where there's so little oxygen that fish and other creatures can't survive. And we call that a dead zone. But we know that there are several pretty large dead zones around the world. And so what I found great about this report, and I can pull up some numbers if that's helpful, about the cost from sewage and wastewater on dead zones and fish stock. So in India and Kenya, it says that our study says that 21 to 11% of the fishery losses are from these dead zones. And so that's a pretty big percent of like those fisheries. So the idea is, if we can remove sewage and wastewater pollution, you won't have these costs on marine ecosystems. And then you could have, more money made from fisheries and less like destruction to the marine ecosystem. So that's one thing I was excited to see because, like I said, for me, it's enough to say that this is harming marine ecosystems. But for many, policymakers, decision makers, banks, it's not really enough to convince them to take action.
Mm-hmm. We've mentioned this. Depending on where you are in the world, you're going to be facing different challenges when it comes to sewage treatment. So, just thinking about here in the States, and particularly where you are near the Gulf, what would Ocean Sewage Alliance like to see happen? What, if in a perfect world, what are these decision makers implementing to make it safer?
Oh my gosh! In a perfect world, everything is going to be so nice. So
maybe a semi-perfect world.
Sure. Well, in my perfect world, and I think a reasonable world in the future, we do have more investment in these utilities. So, I'm talking about like municipal utilities. So like my utility is called Sewage and Water Board. I'm not sure so these are government utilities that are treating and then discharging sewage and wastewater. So in my ideal world, we have more investment in these municipal utilities and in municipal government to run them. So they're run well. And that we have a higher level of treatment. So when they are discharging, we're not worried about nutrients or microplastics or heavy metals that we know are still going into our rivers and other waterways like the ocean. Because you might wonder, like, how would a pharmaceutical get into a fish? It's coming from our municipal infrastructure. And in my dream world, we are having more of like a closed loop system where we're not also pulling tons of water out of our and pumping water in places where there's a ton of water. We're keeping the water that we have. We're cleaning it to a very high standard, and we're reusing it for drinking water and other water sources like watering your grass or showers and things. So we're not having so much waste with the limited amounts of fresh water that we have. And like I said before, there's places that do it really, really well. So I'm not dreaming about a future that's not possible. It is possible in many places. There's just not the amount of investment that we're hoping to see to raise the standards and reduce the amount that we're taking from the environment. And, pumping. It costs a lot of energy to pump water from one place to another. So there's like another aspect of, keeping the water that we have is also reducing our energy costs. And we know that we're in an energy crisis, a climate crisis. So reducing that cost as well.
Something I read on your site that I thought it was so genius in how it was framed. It's just a simple phrase. I mean, when we think of climate, we hear crisis, right? Generally, those things,
Sure. Yeah.
one follows the next. But on your site, it says climate resilience. And I love that phrasing of that. What does that mean to you? Climate resilience versus, climate crisis.
Well, I think that we've all been freaked out a lot, and it doesn't help us to do anything. There is a sort of paralysis with the overwhelm of the climate crisis. Or I work with a lot of coral reef conservationists. The coral reef stuff scares me really, really bad, and it makes me not want it to, I think it can paralyze people from feeling like they can take action. And with our work, we're not asking for new technology, even though I think that would be great. New technologies are like everything that we need, we already have. And in terms of resiliency, we can reuse some parts of our sewage and waste for fertilizer or for like biofuel. So can we take our poop? I would say shit, but feel free to cut it. But can we take that? Can we take our shit and can we make new shit with it? Like we've talked about fertilizers before, biofuels. There are some countries in the Caribbean that reuse their waste to make like these little bricks to build land. So like that to me is resiliency, where we're not just like putting it in a landfill or burning it or dumping it into water. It's like we're actually using this to make ourselves more resilient. And like one thing we're not going to run out of is human poop.
It's the ultimate renewable source of energy. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. So like, I don't want to talk too much about plastics, but like with plastics, we want to stop using plastics and we can think about cutting off the source. We're never going to stop having human sewage because we all are going to be using the toilet. So like, instead of burying our head in the ground and pretending like we don't have a problem, like how can we use this thing we know we're always going to have to make us stronger and, like keep it from entering into like our bodies of water where we want to spend our time. It gets really, really hot here in the summertime, and there's a lake here that's not too far from my house, and I have a boat. And like, I know there's human shit in that lake, and it makes me not want to go in it. So as we
really, why?
Yeah. I mean, earlier we talked about diving into sewage, but yeah, it's just like these are things that if we could clean them up, like would be so wonderful for people to be able to have access to it. And like you might have seen before the Paris Olympics, Paris spent a lot of money to clean up their municipal infrastructure, and nothing is perfect. There's like in a city like Paris, their city is very old. Like they're never going to have a perfect system, but the way they invested in that was to hopefully make it so that more people can access those water spaces and green spaces without feeling like they are swimming in human shit. Cause like that doesn't make me want to go visit a park. So I think like, yeah, so the Paris stuff was cool. And they still had sewage in their water because like it's a very old system, but they invested billions of dollars to clean up that stuff.
You mentioned sometimes like it feels like a futile mission, right? That these problems are too big, these systems are too old, like there's too many factors that contribute to why it's not working. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed to just throw your hands up and say, well, honestly, what could I actually do? What could we actually do? Like just, let's just talk about here in the States. And even, the Northwest is going to have different problems than where you are versus, back East. But what are actionable steps that are reasonable for just a normal citizen to take, to, further the mission of the Ocean Sewage Alliance?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say, and you two know better than me, as well as me, because the work you all do, I've read your website. You're doing great work as well. So just know that like this is a solvable problem that doesn't need to feel daunting. And I would say for somebody who's not working in this field, at least look and see where is your toilet stuff going to? Where is your municipal utility discharging? You know, how old is that system? Has there been investment? I think just knowing about what's happening with your own city is a great start. And two, I would say, know that there is more than one solution. So I talk about this company all the time. We work with a company called Water Warriors, and they make these pellets that absorb phosphorus pollution. They're called Poseidon pellets. So it's like they create like a sack full of these pellets, and they have been testing out adding these on-site treatment plants, and they've got a project in Miami with the municipal waste treatment plant to absorb some of this nutrient pollution with a pretty low-tech addition. So it's like also like, where can we do these like low-tech add-ons to help protect the marine ecosystem? You know, I mean, I think that's kind of like a extra level than like a regular person, but just know that like there's lots of different ways that we can deal with this problem, and that it isn't overwhelming. What we need is to just draw attention to it and let folks know that like we need to spend more money on fixing these outdated systems and building new infrastructure.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about a lot. And I hesitate. I don't want to, start pulling a bunch of fire alarms, but it does feel like there's some fire alarms going off.
Yeah.
Especially, like we said, we flush and forget. We don't really think about our sewage system because it works right now. But there are still challenges and problems, and we don't think about it until we're dealing with it in our basement or it's running through the streets or whatever.
I'm curious to know. I mean, in New Orleans, I know is a maybe not as old as Paris, but it's an old city as well. What sort of things? And it's obviously a unique position when you talk about its relationship to the Gulf, and it's just a unique city, right? What kind of things do you see just locally where you are, either happening or that needs to happen to make it better?
I love New Orleans, and I wouldn't put us at the top for innovation and protecting nature, which probably won't make me too popular here. But one thing that has been going on here, so we talked a little bit about wastewater. So I want to just quickly talk about the difference between like sewage and wastewater, and like when they do come together. So sewage, like what I'll be talking about, is like stuff coming from like our taps, our shower, our toilets, our house, that is going into like a pipe that is then going to a municipal treatment plant. And then wastewater is a bit broader, but what I'll talk about just, like here in New Orleans, is the wastewater is like when it rains, the water goes into a storm basin or like a storm drain. And then that water goes directly untreated into the river. So like I said, some places have different setups, but for us, the storm basins they go straight to the river. And one thing that's been going on in some cities is how can we keep more of our water like on the land and not going into back into the river? Because traditionally that water would be absorbed into the ground, and we have a lot of issues with like concrete, so that doesn't absorb water, and like asphalt and all sorts of stuff that make the ground not be able to take in that water. So here in New Orleans, I've seen a few projects where we're trying to keep the water for longer before it needs, so it's not being discharged straight back into the river. And that helps us out because we used to be a swamp, and in some parts it still feels pretty swampy, but we're not meant to not store that water on land. So that causes some of like the sinking that we're used to. And like with the water rising, it is a problem if like you're sinking and the water is rising, and it doesn't work out too well. And we've lost a lot of coast. So one thing that I say we're doing okay here is thinking about like keeping water where it's supposed to be. And that helps us from sinking lower. And talking about like those nature-based solutions where we're trying to mimic what would have happened. So with the river has been levied for hundreds of years, because we have all the river traffic. And because I live here, I'm like, we see the boats, but I don't think we're always thinking about like the amount of river traffic that's happening on the Mississippi, because it feels kind of like olden days to me. But we really still do have like a bunch of big boats coming down, moving stuff, and because of that, there's like concrete levees. So the river hasn't been able to like flow around, change course, and deposit sediment as it would have before the levee system. And because of that too, we haven't been building land. So there is a project that's proposing to let the river build land back like it would have before these levee systems. So stuff like that I think is awesome. And I think that's where New Orleans and Louisiana could be a leader as we're looking to protect what we have and look at like how did it work before? You know, like we didn't always come up with the best idea as humans in like making cities livable forever. And there's like no way I think people could have known like in the 1800s where we would be today. But those levee systems have really caused a lot of issues with our natural ecosystem. So like, can we mimic nature? So anyway, I'm going to just stop talking for a second because like, as you might see, I'm just like can go down a hole and be like, and now we're going to talk about the 1800 buildings.
We love it. We're here for it. This is exactly what we're
we need
about.
to have you on another episode, I think. So,
well, certainly that's not my area of expertise. I just used to live right next to the river, and I could see it from my apartment when I woke up, and it was so cool because I was like, "Oh my God, there's so many ships that are actually going down the river," and you can't normally see it because we're so flat. You mentioned we're below sea level. It's not like you can see the river unless you're kind of like right next to it, but there is so much happening over there.
That's funny. You're right. Like when I think of river traffic, I'm imagining a riverboat with the wheel and the guy in the suit and like, I don't know, people singing. But, you know, it kind of brings to mind a specific time in American history, especially when you talk about the Mississippi. But it is still a very like, it's a high traffic way to transport goods, whatever. But I would not have thought about the effects of that outside of the romantic notion we have about the Mississippi River.
Yeah. Because like I said, you don't see it, but like maybe if you're by a port, like I know I've like been in some like places like San Francisco, you can see the port, and you're like, oh right, those are shipping containers. Like that's where we're getting all of our like random stuff through these shipping containers.
Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for breaking down a lot of the things that, you know, I think if we stop and thought about it, we would figure it out. But because it's not, because we don't have to deal with it day to day, we kind of forget how intricate and complicated some of these systems are. And that even though, you know, here in the States, at least, most of us are really, really privileged to have clean, safe water. And that doesn't mean that there aren't still problems. And that doesn't mean that we can't do better. If people want to go check out this report, and if they want to, you know, forward it on to decision makers in their area, how could they do that?
Oh, sure. They can go to our website. We can also put like a link in the notes from the talk. But like we also have, I'll send you this like interactive thing that makes it really easy to understand because it is a lot of numbers. But just like the takeaway is like, it makes sense to invest in this infrastructure because it saves money. And plus, it protects our marine ecosystems and it protects our human health because, like, who wants to swim in shit? So it's like a win-win-win-win-win-win.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely include that link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining us, and hopefully we get to talk to your friend in Kenya and have you back on the show sometime.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for helping me to cross this off my life list of things to do.
One less thing for you to do.
Wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on. Thank you.
All right. Jasmine Fournier, Ocean Sewage Alliance, really, really important work they're doing down there to protect our oceans and to really educate people. Yeah, we love having Ocean Sewage Alliance. We've had them on the show a few times, and we're congratulations to her on her new position, you know. I don't know who she had to kill off to get there, but you know, I mean, I'm sure maybe we want to hear the next interview. We'll ask her about the backstory. Yeah, we'll find out how that happened because about the So their and their new report is very informative, very detailed, very helpful. I think to any policymakers or whether you're in private industry looking at the impact of oceans and water quality. I think she's in the best place to study that. I mean,
New Orleans is half underwater anyway, so what better place?
Well, she was lovely. It'll be great to get updates from her on how things are progressing down there.
Yeah.
And we are so glad you guys joined us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the ZuLoo Poodcast. Follow us on social media at our links in the show notes below. To learn more, visit our website, ZuLoo.org. If you liked the podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. For even more ZuLoo fun, send us an email with your toilet stories to podcast@ZuLoo.com for a chance to be featured on the podcast. This episode of the ZuLoo Poodcast is sponsored by ZuLoo Inc., a benefit corporation dedicated to the goal of universal access to toilets, hygiene, clean water and sanitation through the power of social enterprise. Learn more at ZuLoo.com.